And some of us might just have a different structure. And one thing we'll see is with scoliosis, where there's kind of a lateral curvature like this, obviously gravity and just the weight of your body is going to further that unless you strengthen the central structure, your spine, to resist that. So you may never ever get back to normal because we're all dealing with a handicap. Some of us are more rounded in the side view. Some of us have more curvature here. It might be something structural, it might just be muscular or neurologic. Sometimes it's just how the brain is talking to the muscles. These are the deep spinal erector muscles. And the way we strengthen them is to not bend at the spine. Now the spine bends and it coils to add more power and strength to our movements. But if we do that all the time, we're always bending, that's going to create weakness and alterations in our natural spinal curves here. We're supposed to have a nice C shape, nice thoracic curve, and then some lumbar curve. Now what we see is the pelvis tilting, forward pelvic sway, is all because the spine is weak and it's not doing its job. So we just strengthen. There's three big muscles that run the spine, which are your erector muscles, and then we have the deep erector muscles. These are the devils in the details. And just the way they attach allows this idea of decompression. Your spine has this ability to decompress, open up the joints, and that's what we're approaching when we strengthen these and add decompression to our movements. So we're just hacking our workouts by adding that spine element into it, because we can be big and we can be strong and have a weak spine. So we need that as well. The spine itself and the joints are not as susceptible to injury when these little muscles are strong. So they all need to be doing their job. And often what we'll find is areas like spinalis here might be tight and strong in one area, and the one above and below is weaker and inflamed. So we have that too. And then we have maybe the rotatories on one side are tighter, pulling one way over the other. But what we need to do is activate both at the same time, and that creates an isometric force. So we have all these restrictions in the joints. Just think about your chiropractor, how hard sometimes he has to press on your back. He could be putting, with the amount of speed and force he's putting in there, it could be putting upwards of 300 pounds of pressure just to move a single joint. That's how locked down these are. So think about how much strength it will take and how much strength you can build up internally by fighting against those joints, but not really moving, but I'm just raising up and resisting all that compression and all those joint restrictions and all those imbalanced muscles and all the big muscles that overlay it, like the upper traps and your lats that cover all these muscles that can become warped and distorted over time just by strengthening the little muscles of the spine, because they work together. These are at each different level. I just spread them out so you could see them, but they cover the spine. Now there's joints and there's ligaments there as well, and those resist the bending, but over time, ligaments can't contract, joint tissue can't contract. It can become hardened, and that's why arthritis, that's why your body creates arthritis, is to stop the furthering of that curvatures, but it's only going to delay it because it's going to get overstretched, and eventually your spine's going to fuse, just like a doctor would go in and put rods in your back. Your spine's going to do the same thing by fusing and hardening, but that really kills your motion. That's going to affect your hip joints and everything else, and your extremities, cause issues there, because you can't have one joint affected without affecting the rest of the body. It's like removing one block from a stone arch. They're all going to fall down. So the muscle's job is to help the ligaments and support them. The ligaments are just there as a supporting structure. The muscle is there to use the structure, to lengthen it and to strengthen it. So we're talking about genetics. Some of us will say that we have too much curvature in the upper thoracic or the lower thoracic. My mom had that, so it runs in the family, and we think we can't do anything about it. But then why are you going to the chiropractor to fix that? And if we're looking at these muscles here, such as the multifidus and the rotatories and all these that help act and strengthen the spine, keep it from bending and warping that way, or rounding. If we strengthen those, we can limit that progression.
Here's the video in summary. Stability of the spine. The chronic, returning, unrelenting injury that many of us face is a stability of the spine issue. We have restricted areas and deconditioned joints that are not moving properly, but we also have the compensation areas. The compensation areas are those joints that are forced to increase their motion with our daily activities. This compensation motion is often seen in something like the sacroiliac joint. It's a big, stable joint with lots of tissue that can become unstable over time due to the hip joint not having enough movement with walking, what we call a joint restriction. The general theme with the ball socket joints is when we have imbalance of the muscles that attach to them. Femur or the humeral heads are not going to be properly positioned in the socket and can no longer have full range of motion. Often joint restriction in chronic cases comes from one muscle not performing its job because it has become inhibited by other overused and dominant muscles. This can happen anywhere in our body, but it's very prevalent in our spines because the spine is designed to allow a lot of motion, but we abuse that motion and then need to learn to strengthen the spinal muscles to bring back stability. In our culture, we have a lot of bad habits that cause this breakdown. And not only do we need to move more overall, but we need to learn how to move better and more functionally. We need to learn to access and use these inhibited and weakened muscles to prevent compensation motion from turning into arthritis.
How you doing, guys? Purple for the purple presentation. We're going to be talking about the foundation of health. So this is the big intro video into all the classes we're going to be doing about how to strengthen your spine, how to get out of chronic pain. We have these injuries that keep reoccurring, and sometimes there's no big cause. You know, you're in bed, you wake up, you slept a little funny, the neck's out again. We tend to think that that's normal, that just happens. Big example we'll use is a light bulb that's slowly dimming. We don't even notice it. We don't see how we've degraded. And then we remember it. We're like, oh, it's age. I'm getting older. So instead of thinking of it as I'm getting older, it's just we've given these injuries time to get worse. So we have these instabilities. We have these muscular imbalances that we've given time that have turned into degeneration and arthritis of our joints. Now the joints are starting to take the hit, and we're starting to feel it. And we might not feel it in our spines is the big thing. Sometimes we feel it in our elbows, our wrists, our hands, our extremities. Because the spine actually has a lot of mobility, it has a lot of motion, because it has to protect the nerve roots and the spinal cord. So it needs that motion. But what can happen is the spine can become arthritic and degenerative, and we don't feel it. We feel it in our hips. And that's when we come to chiropractor. We want this symptom to be fixed, but the cause is in the spine. Now, chiropractic can help that. A lot of times we have this hip pain, we get an adjustment in the neck, suddenly the hip's moving better, we're like, I don't understand it, but whatever. But this shows that there was some imbalance, there's some weakness in the spine that's causing this hip to go out. And it could be anywhere like that. That's just an example. So the two things we're going to teach you, the two big things, are how to hinge at the hips. We're bringing our center of gravity where it should be. That was the big thing for me. When I hurt myself, I broke my heels, I was walking wrong. I had surgery, I was walking on my toes, and a lot of us do this, we're not walking correctly, our hips are forward. Because we actually understand this second step a little bit better than we understand the first step, because these two things need to work together, and that's what we're going to go over. The hinging at the hips, the ability to hinge at the hips, but also place our torso on top of our femurs. We're lifting ourselves up, engaging here first. That's why it's called foundation training. We're training our foundation, our hips, and those leg muscles to work properly, so the spine work properly and be the stable central structure that it's designed to be. Second step, learning to decompress the spine. This makes sense. We have these nerve roots that can get compressed. Gravity's constantly pressing up on us. We're just teaching you how to lift up against it. The more you lift up against something, right? It's the same idea with exercise. You do a spinal muscles, that will get stronger. That will keep it decompressed. Okay, because sometimes when we're just adjusting something, it's going to get compressed again. You know, push it in, pushes back out. And you'll notice that that window tends to shorten as we get older, because the muscle balances aren't actually being corrected. We're loosening up that tightness a little bit, but there's a weakness that no one can address but you. We have to strengthen those lengthened muscles. We have to get them working so we have more balance. Keeping the spine lengthened and strong. The hip flexor muscle, the big one we're going to talk about is the iliopsoas. We have other muscles like the gracilis, which help turn. Most of us have this externally rotated femur problem. When they turn out, the hips counteract that by bringing them forward. So when the hips go forward, it helps us walk a little bit more. Then we're getting too much movement from our sacroiliac joints, these joints here. So they're generating what we call compensation motion. Same with the lower back. A lot of people are very swollen here and gushy because that's indication of a sprain, right? You sprain your ankle, you sprain that joint, you're getting inflammation because it's locking it down. There's too much motion. So you twist that ankle too far. So this is happening over time. It's like a car wreck happening over 10 years. A little too much motion, a little too much motion, a little too much motion. I bent this way, and then all of a sudden you have this big stable area with lots of ligaments and joints that's locked down nicely, suddenly very unstable, not moving like it should be. And the big problem actually is here, the hip joint not mobilizing as it should, because when we're walking, this should actually be generating a lot of motion, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it hits that wall, or we just have this tight muscle that we don't want to fight again, right? Because most of us, we do shorter steps faster. And my mother, she's a great fast walker, I noticed, but she's like rapid, little short steps. Like slow it down, lengthen that stride. Because then you notice you're using this muscle to walk. And the big thing is with shoes. We have these cushions on the bottom of our shoes, and they absorb the impact of that heel, right? So we don't really need to use this muscle anymore because it's not needed to guide that stride. It's not needed to slow it down so the impact isn't as bad, because we don't feel it anymore. Because, now we're walking on flat surfaces with a cushioned heel, so the hamstring's all dominant, hip flexor's not working. We'll get into more of that later walking. We'll get in depth on that. But you can see some of that subtlety there, why that hip flexor becomes weakened over time. It's also sitting too, because the hamstring is being shortened in a sitting position. But also the hip flexor is not being trained to work right. So this is the double entendre, that's affecting us. We're getting weakness from underuse, and we're getting a lockdown from an overuse. We're creating a shortened position on that hamstring. So we're engaging that hip flexor. We're not just sticking our butt out, right? Because that's half the problem. A lot of us people like stand up straight. They're doing this and this. It's like this wobble motion. We're just taking both of those things, or turning it into one, where you feel like you're lengthening and opening up those joints. You can see that position a little bit better here without the anatomy. Not everyone's like this, because some people, they keep the hip, right? And they're just fixing the torso. They're throwing themselves here, throwing those hips forward. But we got to get that foundation first, get that engaged as well, because the more normalized our spinal curves are, the better our system's going to function. Our nervous system's going to function. Biomechanic-wise, but also organ-wise, tissue-wise, because nerve flow is everything with life. Another example here is the forward head translation. So often you'll see the head will follow the hips. Hips go forward, the head's right there. Now a lot of people will correct this by driving that head back, but they're not getting that hip too. We got to get that hip. That's what's most important, is getting that hip underneath us. And that's the one key we're missing, because most people understand this. They're like, oh, I got to get that head back. Sometimes we don't notice how far the ear is in front of the shoulder. It should be actually right in line with that AC joint, because it's more weight. Rounding here, that's really hard for the nerves, especially going to the arm. Our brachial plexus going into the arm being compressed here because of that rounding. And yes, this is genetic sometimes. Like, oh yeah, my mom, grandma, we all have that hump. But it's still, at the end of the day, it's tight muscle that we can change. Even if there is some sort of genetic narrowing of the bone, sometimes the front of the bone is just a little more narrow, you can still strengthen the muscles and counteract that. Your head may always be a little forward, but we can stop it from going here to here, and that can be a big difference. It's 10 pounds, right? Even if we can never get you quite to perfect, we can still stop the progression or slow it down. That's the goal. So posture isn't necessarily harder to do this posture, but it may feel that way at the time because we have to first fight against these tight muscles that are very restricted, and we have to use these weaker muscles. And that's where it becomes a little complicated, and it's a little tough at the start. But it's worth it in the end because you can be saving a ton of energy. So here's the thoracic extension problem, that leaning back that we have. The hip and the shoulder are not in line, and the hip flexors are not engaged, and we're getting the tilting of the pelvis. So breathing is the big problem here. That's why this is so important, because we're leaning back, we're throwing the hips forward. And actually, if you just lean forward, we can see that I haven't really changed that. All I'm doing is throwing my hips forward a lot of times. A lot of times we're not actually lifting our head back at all. We're not actually doing thoracic extension. We're just doing a forward pelvic sway. And those hamstrings want to be in that position. They want that position that's forward. So those hamstrings control a lot of us. Neck muscles control a lot of us. You can control the head, control the body. So we got to get both the areas working together. The issue here is the hip flexor engagement, and also the diaphragm is the big issue that we didn't talk about yet. The diaphragm's right here. When we engage that, we feel, let's try this right now. Deep breath, even when you're sitting, right from here. Try not to let your shoulders move. Try to bring your chest up as you breathe. Try and take in more air than you're letting out, just for now, just an experiment. What I want you to feel is that lengthening of the spine. You can even feel it when you get good at it. You feel it down in your tailbone. You feel it all the way through your spine. That good. A lot of people are like, breathe, feel it lengthen your spine. Like, how am I supposed to feel my breath to my low back? But you can feel that stretch and how the spine lengthens with breathing. That's what it's supposed to do. Like when it's colder or when these muscles are dominant, a lot of people when they get older, what you see is it's all from the chest. The shoulders are going up, chest is caved. These muscles are all very tight. The SCMs, the back of the skull is very tight. And what we see is a lot of things, this neurodegenerative diseases going along with this, Parkinson's. Could it be constant tension on the brainstem, constant tension and stress and inflammation and breakdown that's leading to the brain decay?
When we're talking about imbalance of the muscle, it can pull a bone in one direction. We see this with the femur and the humerus. These are our two ball socket joints for our extremities, all attaching to the central structure. So if that one rotator cuff muscle is imbalanced, we're going to have that joint, that humeral head being pulled out of the socket ever so slightly sometimes. That's still going to affect the range of motion. It's going to lead to wear and tear. What we also see is the spine is compensating by rounding or compressing to get some extra range of motion to help support that shoulder that's now a little inhibited. It's not tracking like it should because it's not being compressed into the socket. That's what we're going to feel with a lot of these exercises, is this lateral compression. Both shoulders being pressed in the socket. We're using those weaker muscles to rotate that back in and lock it in. The same with the hips. So generally, we're seeing both shoulders internally rotated, both hips externally rotated, and the spine compressed and shrunk in between those two. So obviously, we need to lengthen that spine and counter-rotate shoulders and hips, compressing them back where they should be so they're tracking throughout these motions properly.
This is a great way to think about it. It's a little old-timey because most of us have like the supermodel idea of standing as good posture is this leaning back, opening up the chest, but we're losing the foundation. As soon as you put a book on the head, you'll notice, oh, that book will fall right back because my hips aren't centered underneath me. So as I put the book under there, I'm forced to lift up against that book to keep it balanced. The chest raises, and the hips are engaged. This is what we're looking for. So if that helps you, sometimes I say, think of a balloon being attached to the back of your skull, just lifting up, like you're a marionette. People will connect with different ideas, so I'll throw a bunch at you, see what you get. But the book is my favorite, it makes the most sense. If you want, you can think about doing this against a wall. Walls don't lie, unless they're poorly constructed. Floors don't lie, they're very flat. What we'll see sometimes is people laying on a table who look pretty good posture-wise. As they lay down, we'll see that rounding in the mid-back. You're supposed to have a little rounding, but sometimes it's too much, and we'll see the hump appear at the base of the neck and see that stuff. Because your hips are now forced to be level with your shoulders because you're laying on a flat surface. Relatively on the table, it's going to be flatter. And we can see a lot of those distortions there that we might not see when you're standing because you're able to hide a little bit. A lot of people might even tell you, oh, you have great posture. Why are you going to do a posture class? Some of these things we just don't realize. We don't feel the engagement. We have no idea that our head is forward, that we're rounded. And the table or the floor or the wall will show you some of those things. So correct posture, it's got some subtleties. It's controlled, it's confident, but it's also relaxed. A lot of people think rigid automatically when we start talking about posture. They get into merely military pose, they're raising those shoulders up. And like we talked about, we don't want to let those dominances take over. We don't want our strong muscles to activate. That's the biggest problem. You need to learn to activate what we know as the inhibited muscle, which is the weaker muscle. Usually it's the unactivated muscle when we're doing our normal movement because it's just been patterned that way. So you notice the one thing is you'll feel restrictions as you're going into this tightening and lengthening of the spine itself, not the shoulders. So we don't want that rigidness. We just want it controlled. It's engaged. We feel like muscles are engaging and the spine is lengthening, the joints are opening up. What that restriction is those joints have become hardened into a certain position because they're trying to protect the nervous system. The joints are becoming a little more rigid because they're doing the job the muscles are not doing. Over time, that will lead to arthritis and degeneration. It's actually the body trying to lock down that area to stabilize it because usually sometimes we have too much movement in a certain area. Areas of the flexors, and we'll go over these muscles later and some of the other ones that help with posture. But you just think now, the only thing you can get from this presentation is neck flexor, hip flexor, both working together. These are the two weak muscles that we just don't get enough engagement from because we're very tight here. Upper traps, levator scapula, SCM muscles, all neck extensors. We need hip flexion. So too much extension, we need flexion. Makes sense. Same with the hips. Hip flexors unengaged. We have the hip extensor, the hamstring, very tight, hypertonic, shortened. Okay, a lot of these words you're going to hear concentric, hypertonic. These are just AKs for each other. Short, strong, powerful. A lot of times we're always stretch the hamstring, and that's what I hear all the time. Is oh yeah, stretching that hamstring is, feels good for a little bit and then comes back. But we're not addressing the weak muscle. So what we're training you how to do is functional movement. We're strengthening while stretching, and that's what the hip hinge movement is all about. You think of it like a very good deadlift. A lot of people do deadlifts wrong, so just don't think, oh, I'm going to go do deadlifts. I'm going to teach you how to hinge properly. So the more weight you're going to add on, your body's going to cheat. The body always cheats by rounding or bending at the spine somewhere. Sometimes you'll see with deadlifters, their head will come up because that little bit of rounding is going to help them. They'll round and lock their knees at the back so they can get the heavier weight with that. With foundation training, there's no weights. It's all body weight because we want to focus on strengthening the spine. And we're going to generate a lot of force that way. It's going to be mind-blowing how exhausted you can get in just a few seconds doing some of these exercises. This is something we'll be returning to a lot, the structure of health. So health is the umbrella, protects our bodies from disease and injuries, and with these different pillars that help us along the way, help us get better, or help us on a preventative means. Exercise keeps us strong, keeps our cardio so we don't get things like heart disease. All we're suggesting is the foundation. When we work on the foundation, so these other things can work better for you. Spinal stability, making that structure that protects your nervous system strong so your nerves can function properly, so everything else can function as it should, as you were designed to. So the body's always seeking balance, it's always seeking homeostasis. So if there's an area that's stuck, it's not moving, there's another area that's going to have increased motion, as we call compensation motion. A big example of that is the hip joints. The hips aren't moving as they should. Lower back, sacroiliac joint is going to generate a little more motion than it should to help you walk. And that's not going to be a big problem right off the bat, but over time, that big, stable sacroiliac joint becomes very unstable. It becomes injured often. And it shouldn't, because it's very stable. It's got lots of broad ligaments that protect it. But when our center of gravity is wrong, and motion is being forced to increase those sacroiliac joints, sometimes you have one that's stuck, one that's being opened all the time into a sprained position. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's getting more in those lower lumbars. But generally, it's the hips that are not being mobile. As we talked about first, we'd like to engage that hip flexor. Trying to flatten a little bit of that low back. We're not flattening to the point where we're tucking. We don't want to tuck because we shrink. Remember, this is all about lengthening the spine, so we don't want to achieve this hip flexor engagement rounding. And you'll notice this sometimes when you're forced to go upstairs, because going upstairs is hip flexor. You're raising that leg. A lot of people see they're automatically hunched going up those stairs. If you do it lengthened, oh my gosh, it's so much tiring because it's forcing the spine to work, become strong, and that hip flexor is forced to work in a different way. We don't want to tuck ourselves and round ourselves because it's going to come back to bite us. And what you can see when both these areas are engaged, there's a lot of things. The chest is high, but mainly ear, shoulder, hip, and the outside of the ankle, where that fibula is, what we call the lateral malleolus. You can think of it just as your heel, that's fine, is all in one straight line. That's kind of what we want to achieve. And one thing you'll notice as you're doing this is the feet will start engaging. As soon as you get those hips back, those feet start grabbing. Now, this was important for me when I was first studying this stuff because my feet were injured. I broke both ankles. So I was walking wrong. So the rest of my structure was failing because my foundation wasn't moving right. So I had to first learn to use my hips right, because I was doing all these different types of foot exercises. And it was just like chiropractic. It would help me for a little bit, but it kept coming back. Something I was very vigilant for the foot exercises to be fine. If I slept in the right position every night, I was fine. But it wasn't much of a life. It was constant maintenance until I learned how to walk properly. Because then I was doing maintenance all the time. Every time I was at work, I was doing proper movements, proper hip hingings, keeping my spine straighter. It just wasn't this one idea that I had one day as, I should have great posture, because I was already a chiropractor. The posture was already in my mind. It's just I didn't understand the subtleties of it. I didn't understand this muscle, the hip flexor, and where it should be. I didn't know how it should feel. And that's what we need to teach you today, is how to feel what correct posture is. So we're not going to just set you in a certain line. People won't be like, where do my hips go? Are they here? Are they here? You need to feel that last little bit of lengthening, because sometimes it's just very slight. You're just opening up just a little bit. It's that engagement that I want you to feel. Like, oh yeah, now I feel my feet grabbing. I feel my weight shifting into my heel. I feel that engagement. I feel the joints opening up. I feel those neck muscles engaging. I feel this tension removing from the back of my skull. That's what this class is all about today. Just learning to teach you how to feel that. Because then you can apply that to your exercise routine. You can apply that to your daily life, how you're sitting, how you're walking. And change is going to happen much faster then. And it's going to create new good habits. So class 1, neurological stress and what our chronic pain is telling us. Let's start out with a fun little experiment. I want everyone to stand up and try and touch your toes. So while you're down there, I want you to first think about what you feel stretching. Is it your hamstrings or your lower back or your calves? Actually, it might be all three. So next, think about the position of your spine. Go ahead and try and keep that position that your spine is taken to get you down low enough so you could actually touch your toes or even touch the floor, or maybe you're just dangling a little bit below your knees. Go ahead and stand up straight, keeping that spine position you had. And what you should notice is your spine has bent a certain way. Maybe your shoulders were raised, your back was round, and your head pulled into extension to get down that low. So these changes are small, but let's see how much work the spine is actually doing here to help you out. Let's all do the same experiment, but don't do any bending at all from your spine. So if your spine is straightened properly, and you are now doing what we call a hip hinge, which we'll get into later, you should not be able to reach the floor at all. And we'll spend a good bit of time on the hip hinge later, because it can be tricky to teach your body how to move this way. Other cultures do it far more naturally and is integrated into their everyday movement patterns. So the goals for today, what I want to focus on in this class and the rest of the week and the rest of your week on is this simple idea: limit all bending at your spine. We're going to build and expand on that idea that we need to strengthen our spines to stabilize the chronic injury, the injury that reoccurs. So it's going to help chiropractic be more effective and to have your adjustments hold longer, last longer, so you're not coming in as much. And even if you are coming in as much, it's more to stay on peak and getting further
towards up the mountain of health than staying at the same level, being in pain. It's a lot different when you're not in pain and you're trying to get that higher level of function than just wandering around in what we call like the valley, Get towards that peak. So strengthen the spine and then mobilize the hip joints. 2 goals. Usually I get some various forms of questions because this is a little bit of a different idea. So am I not supposed to stretch my spine is one of the big questions. Another one is, how do I pick up things without bending at my spine? It's not how I was taught. It's taught you bend your knees and you round a little bit. It's just easier to do it that way. And why does standing and moving like this feel so unnatural? So as we know, prevention is sometimes the best cure. Doesn't really make much sense, but those of us who have studied chiropractic or have been patients for a long time are familiar with the benefits. We know it can help us move and feel better, and we know it can remove stress from our nerves and help prevent issues we don't even know are happening. That's the catch-22 of preventive care. We may never know what we have stopped from happening, what we've prevented. I've had the opportunity to see into the future in a few different ways, to give some warning to you today. Sometimes change happens so slow we don't notice it. It's like a light bulb. It's slowly dimming. We don't always recognize how hindered our ability to see is. So once you get that new light bulb in, you screw it in, it's like a miracle of brightness. It's like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how dim it was before. I was reading the book like 1 inch away, but I had no idea. So how did I not know how dim my world was up till now? I had an injury which increased the speed of my body's breakdown. Talking about myself now. I already had high levels of issues before I injured myself. I just never noticed them before. So the spine's primary roles are protection and stabilization. What I've learned from my experience is that the spine is a great compensator. It's good at bearing the brunt of our lives and being quiet about it. It is always seeking balance to prevent nerve stress. I've seen many patients who've had no idea they had severe arthritis in their spines because they had no pain. A lot of these patients come in with headaches or shoulder pain, hip pain, knee pain, you name it, knee, ankle pain. The spine lost its ability to function properly as the central stabilizing structure, and now all the other joints are failing as well. There is stress on the nervous system, and it has to be stopped, or will take a serious toll. So the spine has so many joints to allow mobility, so there will not be nerve pressure from normal bending and twisting. That's what's great about the spine. It's got lots of joints, your chiropractor, you've got to feel all of them. You've got all these different vertebrae, and all these vertebrae have several different joints, and they got ribs attaching. There's lots of mobility that's happening because there's so many joints. Problem is, we abuse that mobility. The spine has its breaking point, but more importantly, it likes to give us warning that our system is failing. And pain is an indicator of stress and nerve pressure. So if a joint is being sprained through normal daily activity, like lifting a box or a weight or exercising, or sometimes it's even getting out of the car or sleeping wrong, it's showing us that we have severe spinal instability. The spinal instability puts that joint right to that breaking point, that a simple movement causes it to sprain. You're in pain, you need to go to the chiropractor. And a lot of times with the chiropractor working out, you might notice, well, you didn't actually work in the area of pain. Because a lot of times the area of pain is not so much the area of restriction, but sometimes it's the area of injury, the area of sprain. So he's working on the areas of torsion where it's twisted. That's usually above or below, or sometimes it's in a complete other, you could have this hip pain or this knee pain. You adjust that atlas bone in your neck, and all of a sudden, I'm moving better. I don't understand it, but it's great. I'm just going to go on with my life. But we need to take another look at it, go a little deeper and see why this happened. So we can't just look at one bad joint, my bad ankle like I had, broke both my ankles, or a bad hip, or an old injury, and blame everything on that, which I did at one point. So we need to stabilize the chronic injury, the central structure that encases our central nervous system. Now that's pretty important, right? This spinal cord and all these nerve roots going to all our organs, all our tissues. It's important. Now with me, I was always blaming my bad ankle. was always, adjust my ankle, please. I'm going to do all these exercises for my ankle. And it helped, definitely helped. My spine just definitely helped. But it wasn't until I changed the way I was moving and reapproached biomechanics. Because I understood posture. We had classes on posture. Chiropractors, we get it. We're like, posture is good. But we're missing some steps here. We're missing these little subtleties that make a huge difference because we've just forgotten how to move in our culture. So your posture, how your spinal curves have formed, is a reflection of how your brain is functioning. It's a picture of your neurological state, how much stress is on there. So stability of the spine is essential to protect you from neurological and structural pathology. So I spent 5 years working in my father's practice. I was baffled at how incredibly bad my patients' spines were. I had no idea that mine were that bad. It's like I said, it's easy to remove the speck from your other's eye, but you have the plank in your own. It wasn't until I started removing that plank from my own that I could see a little more clearly to help other people out. Because a lot of times we can see other people's issues far more than we can reflect and see our own. That's a little more deeper than the spine and the chiropractic. That goes into other levels. So many of these patients that I was seeing were my fathers, and they had been under lifetime care. A lot of them were, mom brought me in right out of the womb, got me adjusted. And I've been coming every 2 weeks since. So for a long time, I searched out different chiropractic techniques, thinking that I just needed that one magical adjustment, because there's so many different types of chiropractic. Like maybe there's just a different type of chiropractic for every different patient. That was kind of my idea. Talk about Ted Coren. He went everywhere and he invented this technique, with the arthrostem, and that worked with him. I'm like, oh, that's it. That's the missing, and it would help certain people more than it would help others. And there is a lot of validity to trying different techniques on people. But the more I studied the decay of my patients' spines, I started realizing there was always a link with the atrophy of the certain spinal muscles. And it could be in different areas, but always there was an area where there was weakness. And where there was weakness, there was either this rounding or this distortion of the spinal curves. For so long, I had been inundated with the idea that mobilization was the cure to spinal disease. I thought simply when a person gets older, right, the spine gets stiffer. We all feel it. So the more I mobilize it, the better, right? But the theory is obviously flawed for a great many reasons. The spinal muscles actually perform in a way opposite of what we may think usually. Their more important role is actually decompression, opening up of the joints. The more these muscles are strengthened, the more they will resist not only bending at the spine, but encourage proper function of what we call the ball socket joints, our hip and our shoulders, which work in tandem. What we'll notice is the hips will often rotate opposite of the shoulders, and the spine shrinks in the middle. So once we get the spine going right, the hips and the shoulders suddenly are moving as they should. So if the shoulders aren't moving right, I would say elbow problems will develop, wrist problems will develop. Same with the hips not moving right. Knee problems, ankle problems. It could be one-sided, it could be both-sided. And as we're focusing on these areas, like I was focusing on my ankle, we weren't focusing on the spine, decompressing it, lengthening it, making sure we're moving right throughout the day. Because once the muscles are balanced, we have proper function, everything's going to start working in tandem as it should. And what I also found out there, I was looking for the magical exercise, looking for the magical exercise as I was looking for the magical adjustment. There is no magical exercise. There's no magical adjustment. I'm sorry. I'll tell you right now. The most effective correction is to learn proper biomechanics. Learn to move more functionally. We need to work smarter, but not harder. So I've watched many people take yoga classes 3-5 times a week, or even people who teach it, unfortunately. And they still have these terrible neurological impressions. So I like to say the spine doesn't lie. I can see what's going on. I know what you're doing isn't working by how your spine looks. It's not about if you're in pain or not. They know it's not working because they're in pain. They're coming to see me. So I like when people ask me to give it to them straight. What do I see? A lot of people they don't want to hear it. So they fix me, get me out of pain. It's okay. But I like when people are like, what can I do? What more can I? Because that was always my question. I liked it when chiropractors would tell me what they saw on my spine because they can't always feel it. I didn't know that. Like when I was in the student clinic, I remember he would just press along my spine really lightly because you're only allowed to like adjust a couple bones, so he wasn't looking. He would just, there was like fingertip pressure, and like every thoracic bone would move. You just go up. And I was like, oh, that's great. That's what it's all about. Getting those pops so easy. Like that's probably good, right? That I have all that motion. You can just easily put those in. No, that showed like severe instability. I had no idea. So I thought, it's great when the bone goes in easy, right? We want that movement. But I knew there was, I should have realized there was a problem. I understood there was some sort of problem because I would just feel like I needed that. But like an hour later, it's like, oh, I need another one. Why? Instability, imbalance, sitting all the time. In school, wasn't getting enough movement, wasn't getting enough proper movement. I lost my ability to move right because of my injury. But even with or without my injury, I wasn't moving right to begin with. It just allowed my progression to happen much faster, which is surely a gift from God because, allowed me to see this, so I didn't get too far down the road and have too much arthritis develop. Allowed me to see so I could help you now today. So it just increased my progression, my rate of progression. So, and when I do feel a nagging joint or an issue, not only am I going to the chiropractor, but I'm always looking to improve my form or being more consistent with my strength. And you're like, oh, I haven't done this in a while, or I haven't done this type of exercise in a while. And I'm not denying that junk happens. That's why we have chiropractors. But the more we work with them, and not just have them work on us, the closer we come to reaching our peak. I like to say the valley is imminent, the peak unattainable. We are going to die and decay, but we have a big say in when and how. So there is no peak. It's just another step upward. You can always do a little better, either climbing the steps or you're rolling down the hill fast. A chiropractor is best suited to help push you up to the next level, not carry you, okay? A good example of this is someone just laying on the ground. I think you're trying to get them up and they're not helping you. It's like dead weight. That's tough to do. It's really hard. As soon as they reach in, they're grabbing on your forearm, they're trying to get up with you. It's so much easier, right? It's an impossible task. Suddenly becomes, okay, you're up on your feet, you're helping yourself. I'm helping you too. And then, well, look at you, you're moving on your own. You don't even need me anymore. You come back, every once in a while, just make sure you're on the right track. That's what chiropractic should all be about, helping you reach that peak. So I'm coming back to the idea of working smarter and not harder. Now that being said, it's a tough catch-22 what I'm proposing for a lot of people. We perpetuate a bad cycle because we have a lot of stress on our spines. It's physically tiring on our bodies and organs. The last thing most of you want to hear throughout the day is work harder. Stress is mechanical as well as mental, and they both feed off each other. A lot of people think, oh, it's just stress, it's mental stress. A lot of times it's mechanical stress that can cause the mental stress, right? It's like if you're in pain all the time, it's mentally stressful. Okay, makes sense? There are certain muscles which tighten and create certain postures during stress. So there are certain muscles which tighten and create certain postures during stress. A lot of us are stuck in these defensive posture types. We are stuck in what is called the fight or flight stage. This is activation of the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. That's a bunch of confusing words all put together. The best way to get out of this stage is to activate the parasympathetic division, which is the opposite. It's like the off switch to the stress mode. And everything we are going to do here today can help you reach that. It's like what they teach in yoga, the deep breathing, because why? Because you're activating a different part of your nervous system. It's going to take you out of that stress mode. Okay, so there is some validity to that. We are going to teach you to fight against those chronically tight tissues that are causing you stress. We're going to train your body to naturally take a better stance, and we're going to approach objects with a better mindset and form. If you work on it every day, you're going to get stronger over time, and you're going to have a lot more energy instead of allowing breakdown over time. So it's stabilization versus decay. We only have two options here. Coming back to the structure of health. Health is the roof, the umbrella that's going to protect us from disease or injuries. And these different pillars we have, and leave one blank because you can put whatever you want in there. the three big ones we could think about: chiropractic, exercise, diet. These are all supporting health. You have a good diet, health is going to be better. That's easy for most people to understand. Exercise, usually going to have better health, right? Go to a chiropractor, usually going to have better health. So, but the foundation is what supports the pillars. We tend to forget that. We have a good foundation, we should have that. And what I'm going to propose to you is spinal stability, posture is what's going to help all of these pillars. We're going to go into why and how that works. So why is posture so important? So we can see a little bit of why that is. Let's go a little deeper if we can. So let's address the three pillars I mentioned and see how spinal stability relates to them. So we can't fix a problem, obviously, if you don't know we have one. And B, you can't fix that problem unless you understand its origin and how it affects you today. So we said before, posture is a reflection of how your brain is functioning and a picture of your neurological state. What affects the spinal cord? Stability of the spine Stability of the spine is essential to help protect you from neurological and structural pathology. I've said this before. What does that mean? What affects the spine affects the spinal cord. Any stress or direct pressure to the spinal cord and its nerve roots could potentially be the cause of any problems and diseases we see today, potentially. Right? Let's look at some quotes here. The doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will interest his patients in the care of the human frame and diet, and in the cause of prevention of disease. Thomas Edison. Care of the human frame. Hippocrates looked well to the spine for the cause of disease. He understood that if the spine wasn't working as it should, or if he could see distortions in the curves that these patients of his, were going to have problems. And that's what chiropractic is all about too. It's addressing that spine. So we already know the spine is important. Hopefully you understand the spine is important, not just for pain, but for neurological function. We see a lot of different spine patterns, spinal curve patterns. And the biggest problem we teach people is this is just genetic. We can't change these things. But we see it over and over again that we can. People can change these things. I've changed these things in myself. We need healthy spinal curves, and we need healthy nerves. So imbalance of muscular tissue, and then we have imbalance of the ligamentous tissue. We talked about before that when the muscles aren't doing their job, ligaments in the joints take the brunt of it. So ligaments, joints can't contract. They're more stabilizing structures. So when the muscles are imbalanced, there's stress on the joints, the tissue can only harden. It just adds calcium, becomes a little arthritic. That takes a long time. It's a long process. I'd like to say that my job is on the left here. We're fixing those bones, those side-to-side curves. The pelvis is higher on one side, one shoulder is higher, one occiput level is higher, and the head's tilted. That's our job. Your job is these imbalanced muscles. These imbalanced muscles are going to lead to joint stress. The joints are locking down. Why? To protect the spinal cord. So if you don't have the stamina to maintain proper spinal alignment throughout the day, why are you going to go exercise? Exercise is only going to make it worse. You're taking that weak spine that you can't even support good posture. You can't even support good posture throughout your day, normal daily activity, sitting or bending to pick up an object, and then you're going to go try to lift weights with that. Or maybe your arms or legs get stronger, but your spine's going to get weaker. You see that? You big, strong bodybuilders, they can have a very weak spine. And what happens is they're injuring the shoulder all the time or something else. And all of a sudden they can't bodybuild like they could before. Or they can't run like they could before because the spine wasn't strong. They weren't focusing on that. They were just focusing on how much weight can I lift? How far can I run? How fast can I do it? We need to learn how to counteract the muscle imbalance and keep the curvature from continuing to get worse throughout life. So a lack of tone leads to a lack of stability. Our body's response is actually a self-defense mechanism. So we're talking about this. This is arthritis. It's there to help you out. Muscle imbalance, when we move or lift without spinal stability, the concentric, the hypertonic, the tight muscles are left to do all the work. So not only does this create imbalance, but uneven stress on the joints and ligaments, leading us down the path towards arthritis. So we're talking about osteoarthritis or degenerative arthritis. So we're talking about osteoarthritis or degenerative arthritis. We're not talking about metabolic arthritis such as psoriatic arthritis or rheumatoid arthritis. So it's our body's self-defense mechanism. Why? How does that work? It's not a natural progression. Spinal degeneration is an AKA for arthritis. Got that? In case we're confused. So it's not something that just happens. When the muscles are imbalanced, they are unable to perform their job, which is to support the curves of the spine. The ligaments are left to do the work then. So ligaments have little blood supply, and they can't contract, and they are designed to hold the spinal bones together and help it to work as one unit. When the curvature begins to fail because of imbalance or microtrauma begins to injure the ligaments will harden when they heal. This is that scar tissue that builds up, leading to calcium buildup. So the spurs we can see here are actually hardened ligaments. A lot of people don't know that, or they're part of the disc itself. So these were actually joint material that is now hardening to look like bone. A lot of times it's not as spiky as it looks, it's kind of spongy. So, we need to correct the misaligned joint that's causing the deconditioned joint that's not moving as it should and causing this compensation movement elsewhere. That's your chiropractic. We also need to address the muscle balance, especially after getting adjusted. I usually tell people now focus on breathing. You need to focus on using those weaker muscles that were inhibited. Things are locked up. It's hard to get good proper posture. Once you get that moving, you need to use that. You can't go back to your bad habits. So it's fixing a joint. Fixing a joint that is misaligned without balancing muscle is like throwing a ball into the air and expecting to stay there. Some chiropractors are really great. Throw that ball in the air. It's floating there in the wind for a while. You feel good. You're high and dry. And then down, back on the ground again. What happened? I didn't do anything. You got to strengthen the weakened muscle. Only you can do it. Sometimes injuries come back to haunt us. We'll get this decay, this arthritis, much longer after an injury because the ligaments of the joints are taking the hit. Sometimes when people brace in a car accident, they'll hurt a lot more. That's because the muscle took the hit, which is actually sometimes better than the joint taking the hit, because you might not feel it as bad, the joint, but you'll get this alteration of the spinal curve, and you get this arthritis trying to lock things down. Why? Protect the nerves. It's all about protecting the nerves. Why protect the nerves? Because the body relies on it. It goes to all your muscles, goes to all your organs. Function is important, so we can't have pressure on there. And what we're seeing here is this idea of microtrauma versus macrotrauma. We got the big car accident, but sometimes it's trauma over time. You can see the distinction here. They look very similar, this pattern. We found the kid here on the left, looking very similar to that rounded hunch posture that we're going to see from something like a car accident. So texting, another good example, kid working on the computer.
So obviously this is bad when we're texting, but this is bad too because we're throwing the hips forward. So what you can do is either text here, you can actually lower it and bring your eyes down to your phone when you're texting. And a personal favorite of mine is laying on something, get a little strengthening going on, where the base of your neck is here, and you're just hanging and lengthening. It'll be hard at first, but you'll notice you'll have to engage, and these guys will strengthen over time. You just hang out there, do that once a day. When you notice you start shaking, very good functional strengthening. Take tension off your head, you might feel it in your cranial bones and your jaw. Just breathe while you're there. Make texting work for you, not against you.
And this is just one idea, is we're taking things we're already doing and we're doing them a little more functionally, more ergonomically. We don't have to do this all the time. It's just we're creating more balance. It's just we're doing one thing all the time. And it's not so much that we're not thinking about good posture. It's just that we need to understand what good posture is and how to lengthen your spine. That's the biggest issue I see with people, is we need to teach you how to do it. It's not just, this lecture isn't all about, hey, have better posture because you know how to do that already, right? No, I didn't know how to do it. I was a chiropractor. I went to 7+ years of training. I had no idea how to stand or walk functionally. So chances are you don't know either. Went over this before. Forward head translation, how much weight gets added on to that head. We can throw that in with the pelvis being forward too. We're always looking at the head too. But forget, when that pelvis is forward, they can put a lot of weight. Just as you're getting a lot of weight on the base of your neck, tightening up those upper traps, you can get a lot of weight on your sacroiliac joint, causing degeneration down there just as much as you're creating degeneration up in the neck too. Those are the big two areas we see discs with problems, right? L405, a lot of people have issues down there. And then up in the neck, we have a lot of issues. Some people have mid-back stuff too, but generally we're seeing the neck, we're seeing low back. Here's our friend again, just showing removing stress. You know, it's mental too. You know, you're gonna feel better. You know, when people are stressed, when they you know, younger girls growing up, they might take this hunch posture because they're afraid to be tall and stand out there. You know, but it tends to wear on us. We get these rounded, distorted curves, and it locks us into that state. People who are tall and have better oxygen, they're breathing, and have more confidence, they're going to do better in the world. So it's not just about getting out of pain too and removing stress off your nerves. You're going to be a more functional human being here as a little bonus. Let's look at some of the muscle patterns here. See the rounded curves. Usually we see that lengthened muscle, the multifidus muscle in the spine not working as well to cause that lengthening. And then we got the short contracted muscles in the chest pulling the shoulders forward. You got the tight hamstrings, pulling the hip down, pulling that pelvis back, and posterior pelvic tilt. The unengagement of the hip flexor allowing the pelvis to shift forward. So when we get everything in line, ear, shoulder, hip, it's going to stack on itself. The muscles will be balanced, working together. When we're tired, most common reaction I get is, it's so hard. You know, I'm already on my feet all day. I don't need to make this harder. We understand if we're moving better, we're moving functional, we're going to have more energy over time, we're going to have more muscle imbalance. You can push yourself all you want, but once you're in a wheelchair, you're not doing anyone any good. You know, it's like, I tell people all the time, if you're not a plane, the oxygen masks fall from the ceiling. They tell you, put yours on first before helping the child, right? So your children are not going to be helped by you if they're suddenly have to take care of you because you never took care of yourself. Rule number one is you're number one. You got to take care of you. Make sure you're healthy and you're strong so you can be there for other people. Okay? So having an unstable spine is what truly drains your energy. Your muscles are hanging on for dear life to try and prevent stress or direct pressure on your nervous system. And that takes a lot of energy, a lot of ATP. That's draining you right there. Maybe why you're not digesting your food right, because when we're locked in that sympathetic state, that fight or flight stage, we're not worrying about the immune system. We're not worrying about digestion. Our body's focusing on fast heartbeat, rapid, shallow breathing from the chest. And that's just stress that's going to shorten your lifespan considerably. So injuries don't just happen. I didn't do anything, right? It's like nails on a chalkboard when I hear this. The last thing I do is jump down someone's throat at this point because they're in pain. But here's a little reminder before it happens to you. Injuries don't just happen. The body has to become so imbalanced to a point where a simple motion like getting out of the car or picking up a pencil tears joint or ligamentous tissue. So best example I can think of this is a balloon slowly filling up with air. Everyone's surprised when it pops. Oh yeah, it's shocking. But it's just common sense that if you let it go, it will blow up. And we need to bring stability. It might feel great right now, but in time, trouble can happen. And that trouble can be hard to get back. And it's easier to fix it now than it is when you're injured down the line. So a stable spine is not prone to easy injury. We'll look at pelvic tilt a little bit here. We already talked about stacking ourselves. And tilt is something we want to get into later on. A lot of people are like, I stick my butt out to engage that hip flexor. Am I tucking it down in? The biggest thing is lengthening first. Placing ourselves over top of our hips, but we should always feel like we're lengthening, getting taller. We should never feel like we're shrinking down. So the last thing you want to focus on is your pelvic tilt. Make sure you're lengthened first before you address that tilting. We can see how both these postures can play to certain dominances. The hip flexor, sometimes if it's too tight, we'll see the anterior pelvic tilt. And a lot of people talk about that. A lot of people think they're anterior pelvic tilt automatically. I think I thought that as well when I first started studying this, and it's a common misconception. But what I'm going to suggest to you is most people are posterior pelvic tilt, and why it's confusing, because we have hamstring dominance pretty much in everyone. But what happens is the body will trick you by pushing that pelvis forward, and suddenly it looks a lot like anterior pelvic tilt. And suddenly it feels like your quads are tighter because your body is taking that adapted position. But do you really know how to stand correctly, right? It was my trouble when I first started studying this, and it's going to be yours. And pelvic tilt can be very confusing. That's why I've stopped talking about it too much, because I want you to focus on your foundation, getting yourself strong. Because it's always best to return to the basics and focus simply on lengthening your spine. The reason I'm addressing this is because I get pelvic tilt questions all the time. And it's not that it's not an issue, it's just we want to start with the basics first, and pelvic tilt is not. We're getting tunnel vision, we're focused on one area. We need to focus on the spine and learn to keep it lengthened and learn to hinge at our hips. A lot of times, we don't even need to worry about pelvic tilt then. In this picture, you can see my hip flexors are not engaged. This picture is from when I first started looking into this. You can see I'm doing that thoracic extension thing, and naughty, right? Leaning back. Still, generally, things are lined up decently, but it's that subtle engagement we're going to be talking about. And you can see how that pelvis is tilted a little bit. It's hard to see with the pants, but you can see how it's pushed forward and how the abdominals are not engaged here. Tilted forward. And we'll hear a lot of different things. People talk about lower cross syndrome, athletic hip, a lot of AKAs. AKAs we're talking about here. Pelvic tilt, sometimes we're here a little flat back. When that pelvis tilts, it's flattening out that lumbar spine. And we'll see lazy postures way back involved with posterior pelvic tilt. And this is all confusing. So we're going to shelf a lot of that. So you've heard that, you're like, oh, I know I have upper cross syndrome, lower cross syndrome. Let's put that on the shelf right now, because we're all going to put you in the same bracket. We're all going to talk about lengthening the spine. So it's simple. We're cutting out all the confusion, bringing it down to two simple ideas, right? Lengthening the spine, hinging at the hips. My knee, shoulder, all right? Central structure is working correctly. Ankles, shoulders, wrists, it's all going to start working better. It's a simple idea. We're bringing this to a very simple place, very calm place. If the spine is not functioning properly, the rest of the body will suffer. Okay. So we're going to get into scoliosis a little bit, because that might be a question some of you have. So off-centered hips or lateral curvature of the spine. What leg is taking the weight? We got higher shoulders. Definitely chiropractic can help you with this, but maybe you're noticing that it's not. You still have these lateral curvatures. Is it the joint or it's the muscle? Often it's both. And the more we are working on lengthening our spine, obviously not only will the side-to-side curves, like the round and mid-back, be addressed, but also lateral curvature will be addressed as well, because we're forcing lengthening, right? That's going to help on both ends, both spectrums. So the more length in your spine is, the more stable it is. The shoulders will start to level and the hips will start to level. This was an old idea I had, the frag grenade, right? I added hip here. We had flexors, neck and hip. Before I didn't have the hip flexor really in my mind. It was more of that glute idea. And the glute muscle has a lot to do with the pelvic tilt. That's why it's on the end there, the G. But if you can focus on the F for right now, that's what we're focusing on. The rhomboids, they open up the shoulders, they expand, and the abdominals, they're going to help tighten or work with that hip flexor. And the glutes can help with some of that pelvic tilt we have too, that engagement. But what we're working on mainly is the F. Let's remember the F, neck flexor, hip flexor, conscious contraction of the core muscles. It's not only to protect your spine, but it's going to rehab your body and bring muscle balance over time. So posture is not just throwing your head back and leaning back. This makes things worse. I see a high number do this. When I tell them to stand up straight, they're leaning back, but that's compressing an area of your spine and your lower thoracics. And more importantly, we talked about before, it's disengaging the diaphragm. It's disengaging the diaphragm, not allowing you to breathe right, which is allowing lengthening of the spine. So we're getting that core engagement, hip flexor engagement. We're getting the neck flexor engagement, driving the chin back. So we have the shoulders, ear, shoulder, hip, straight line. So every cell, organ, and tissue is controlled by your nervous system. Spine is important. It protects it, right? It's a good idea to keep it aligned. I'm going to add, it's a good idea to keep it strong and strengthened. Decompress that, because we don't want those nerve roots getting compressed. We have a joint out of place, can cause that disc to put pressure on that nerve, but another thing that can cause pressure on that nerve is just flattening of that disc straight out, which we see a lot too. So in class, our first class is to be very basic. We're just going to teach the most common things people are doing wrong in their daily life. So we're going to talk about that thoracic extension. Looking at other cultures, especially in rural Africa, we see women carrying large items on their heads. At first glance, we would assume this is harming their necks, right? That's going to be compressing their neck, oh my gosh, and their backs. But the more it has been studied, has been shown to strengthen the muscles that decompress the joints, because why? They're lifting up against the force, just as we should be lifting up against gravity. I'm not saying that you should go out and buy a 5-gallon bucket and carry around on your head right now. It's probably the worst idea in the world. Because they're doing it from a younger age, so they've built up to that. They've trained their spine to work right. We got to do body weight alone to get you back on the right page. And we sometimes forget gravity, right? We have this constant force pushing down on us. When we don't resist it, the muscles atrophy, and the joints start taking the hit. Sometimes I'll say to you, you're resting on your joints. So this is forming restrictions, and then later on arthritis. And we talked about this is essentially a self-defense mechanism, because the body is trying to prevent further what? Neurological stress. Your spinal cord truly is your lifeline, and chiropractic and decompressive exercises are the best maintenance to keep it going in the long run and to keep your organs and tissues from failing. So thoracic extension tends to go along with two other things. We're pushing the pelvis forward to get more thoracic extension, and we're raising our shoulders. So those are naughty, bad things. We want to fully lengthen the spine, and that means keeping our shoulders stacked over our hips in a straight line. Our shoulders actually drop when we do that. And we want our center of gravity on our hips, not too far back on our sacroiliac joints, leading to that wear and tear that a lot of people have. So a little hint here, the body is always seeking balance, homeostasis. So if you have restriction in one area, we have increased motion or hypermobility in another area. If we have a dominant muscle, we will have an inhibited muscle, so it's weak. The chronic areas of pain and discomfort we have are usually the weak, unstable, and hypermobile areas. So at my father's practice, we had a bit of a lighter touch than other chiropractic offices in our area, and we'd often see patients that weren't getting better. One type of injury I'd see commonly is this sprained sacroiliac joint. Now these joints that join our pelvis to our sacrum are supposed to have very little mobility. But when we put our center of gravity on them, we are forced to increase their motion. And our hips will lose their range of motion over time too. So I'd often explain adjusting a badly sprained sacroiliac joint with your normal side posture movement. They're putting you on your side, twisting you. It's a bit like grabbing a twisted, sprained ankle and yanking that around. That's the last thing you'd want. Like, oh, why would you do that? You can't help that. It's all swollen and sprained. Same idea with the sacroiliac joint sometimes. So we need to correct it with a lighter touch, but more importantly, we need to fix what caused that tissue breakdown in the first place. Otherwise, that chronic issue will return until stabilization and strengthening is done. Next topic, we're talking about hip hinging. And this might even be better as a first topic, but they're so integrated with each other. You'll notice that the exercises with the decompression are going to be involved with the hip hinging. So we have to learn to decompress and engage our spine, get the hip hinging right. So the stronger you get, you're going to notice the more your body will shake during these exercises. Our spinal muscles were designed to decompress our joints and discs and relieve nerve pressure. The problem in our society is that these muscles have atrophied or never even had the chance to develop, as we see with our youth today, with the rise in technology and prolonged sitting. They must be strengthened before chiropractic and exercise can benefit you as it should. The pain is just a warning of greater problems.
What do we need on the second exodus?
Chocolate.